In the late 4th century BC, northern India was dominated by the Nanda Empire, which controlled enormous wealth and territory. But popularity and power do not always come hand in hand, especially under its ruler Dhanananda. His government was criticized for corruption, harsh taxes, and a general arrogance toward the population. Many ordinary people, especially farmers, felt the tax burden was unbearable, and resentment towards the state increased over time. Around this time, a Brahmin scholar named Chanakya visited the king's court hoping to be taken seriously as a thinker. Instead, he was publicly insulted for what he was wearing and thrown out. Rather than disappearing, Chanakya swore revenge and set out to find someone who could overthrow the Nandas. That person ended up being a young Chandragupta. According to tradition, Chanakya became a close mentor to Chandragupta and educated him in subjects like statecraft, economics, and military strategy. Chandragupta was being trained to rule with a long-term plan in mind. In the year 321 BC, Chandragupta and his Greek and Punjab mercenaries successfully attacked the Nanda Empire and overthrew Dhanananda, marking the beginning of the Mauryan Empire, which would become the first large centralized empire in Indian history. During his rule, Chandragupta would be heavily influenced by Chanakya, now his advisor, as well as his written work, the Arthashastra, a guide that roughly translates to Treatise on Political Science. In this video, I am going to discuss how the Arthashastra influenced the actions of Chandragupta throughout his reign. A major part of the Arthashastra deals with how a king should actually run his government and who he should trust to help him do it. In the first books of the text, Chanakya writes that the king should surround himself with trained ministers, advisors, judges, and administrators who are chosen carefully. Beyond being noble or wealthy, Chanakya wrote to choose people who have actually proven themselves capable. Chanakya also believed the king himself needed constant training. The text recommends that the king continue studying throughout his life and keep a council of elders from different fields to advise him. Chanakya says they should be individuals whose achievements the king already knows and respects. When it came to selecting ministers, Chanakya argues that character and ability matter most. A minister wasn't supposed to be chosen just because of a family background or because the king could manipulate him. He should be someone who had already shown honesty, skill, and dedication. Chanakya even lists the qualities a minister should have, like good memory, self-control, knowledge, and a strong moral character. If a person was missing some of these traits, they could still work for the government, but only in lower positions and under supervision. At the same time, the Arthashastra insists on checks on officials. The government was expected to constantly watch for corruption, dishonesty, or abuse of power. If an official was dishonest with money, he shouldn't even be near the treasury. If he was corrupt in legal matters, he should not be a judge. Some officials were even tested in secret to see if they could be trusted. Chandragupta followed the system by building a government filled with trained advisors and by relying heavily on Chanakya himself. He ruled using a structured administration with officials who were constantly being evaluated. This created a much more stable government than the one he overthrew, and it helped prevent the corruption and mismanagement that had made the Nanda dynasty so unpopular in the first place. One of the most famous parts of the Arthashastra is how it discusses the importance of espionage and the many specific ways it should be used. The text goes into surprising detail, including using spies disguised as monks, merchants, and household servants. Based on what is written in the Arthashastra, Chandragupta utilized espionage to crack down on dissent, test the integrity of officials in the government, monitor hostile kingdoms, and install double agents in enemy spy networks. This constant surveillance allowed him to prevent rebellions and keep regional powers loyal. He even used his spies to watch his enemies as well as his own officials for something he could use to blackmail them. In a world where kings were constantly overthrown, this stability was a major accomplishment. The Arthashastra is also known for its mandala theory of foreign policy. It argues that neighboring states and states bordering natural friends are natural enemies, while the states bordering those enemies are natural friends. This idea served to guide the actions of Chandragupta throughout his rule. He first conquered the Nanda Empire, his empire's first neighbor, and continued to absorb smaller Indian kingdoms as the Mauryan Empire expanded. His efforts were dedicated to conquering neighboring states and securing his borders. Besides the mandala theory, the Arthashastra also lays out what it calls the six-fold policy, which gave rulers different options for dealing with foreign states depending on their strength and circumstances. These 6 strategies were making peace, making war, remaining neutral, preparing for war, seeking protection, and forming alliances. Each situation required a different response, and a wise king should constantly evaluate which policy benefited the state the most at any given moment. Chandragupta followed this flexible approach throughout his reign. For example, during his early campaigns in India, he focused mostly on war and alliance, defeating weaker neighboring kingdoms while forming strategic friendships when he deemed it was necessary. But he didn't rely on war alone. When he encountered more powerful opponents, like the Seleucid Empire, which inherited parts of Alexander the Great's territory, Chandragupta changed his strategy. Instead of fighting to the end, he made peace through negotiation and arranged a marriage alliance with Seleucus. The Arthashastra recommended choosing peace if it would ultimately strengthen the kingdom. Another part of the sixfold policy was preparing for war even during peaceful times. Chandragupta clearly followed this idea by building a massive professional army and improving the administrative control over the empire. We also see the Arthashastra's influence in economic policy. Dhanananda had been hated for extremely high taxes.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
This created a lot of resentment among all his subjects. Chanakya wrote that taxes should be reasonable, easy to pay, and should support economic growth instead of crushing it. Chandragupta seems to have followed this idea. His tax system was more balanced, and this helped him avoid the kind of backlash that brought down the Nanda dynasty. In the Arthashastra, Chanakya wrote about the implementation of a caste system. This caste system will be used by Chandragupta as a tool to maintain social stability and give every person a role in Indian society. The highest caste, the Brahmins, would serve as priests, scholars, and teachers. The second highest caste, the Kshatriyas, were to serve as warriors, administrators, or even rulers. The third caste, the Vishyas, would fulfill the role of merchants, landowners, and agriculturalists. The lowest of the four castes, the Shudras, would fulfill the roles of laborers and service providers in society. This caste system was not just used to determine the role in society one must fill, but also used to determine the punishments given to members of different castes after committing a crime. For example, committing adultery with a Brahmin woman would be met with a fine if the offender was a Kshatriya, but if they were a Shudra, they would be burned alive. Castes were culturally a part of Indian society for hundreds of years, but Chandragupta made it enforced by the state and used it to organize labor. Marriage was also a part of this political structure. The Arthashastra contains rules about what kinds of marriages are allowed, especially between castes, and what happens if those rules are broken. Marriage became a tool for keeping social order and preventing the mixing of castes, which the text believed would disrupt society. Chandragupta followed the Arthashastra closely, using it to guide his policies and actions throughout his rule. The knowledge and strategies he gained from Chanakya in his writing allowed Chandragupta to rule over a powerful and stable empire when many other kingdoms were battling instability and falling apart. The Mauryan Empire became one of the most organized and powerful political systems of the ancient world, and even though Chandragupta ruled more than 2,000 years ago, his empire and the ideas behind it continue to be studied for the way they connect political theory with real-world leadership.